The Naval Special Warfare Development Group, NSWDG, abbreviated as DEVGRU, Development Group, and commonly known as SEAL Team 6, is the United States Navy component of the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC. The unit is often referred to within JSOC as Task Force Blue. DEVGRU is administratively supported by the Naval Special Warfare Command and operationally commanded by JSOC. In this video, we will discuss the most intense missions ever carried out by SEAL Team 6, now known as DEVGRU. Invasion of Grenada. On 14 March 1979, the People's Revolutionary Army, led by Maurice Bishop, overthrew the newly independent government of the small island of Grenada and established a new regime based on socialist principles. This brought it into continuing conflict with the United States, as the administration of U.S. President Reagan considered the leftist government to be too closely allied to Cuba and the Soviet Union. The invasion plan involved mixing conventional and special forces in a coordinated surprise coup. The main assault, SEAL Team 6, was assigned 3 pre-invasion missions, 2 clandestine political missions relating to regime change on the island, and reconnaissance from the sea of the new airfield under construction on the island's southwest coast. There was almost no intelligence for these operations. On October 23, SEAL Team 6 Assault Group 3 began the airport reconnaissance with a static line parachute drop, along with 2 combat-rating small craft, well beyond detection by the Grenadian military. A rain squall accompanied by high winds broke out just before the SEALs conducted the water drop rendezvous with the U.S. Clifton Sprague, one of 2 C-130 cargo planes transporting the SEALs to their drop point veered off course. 4 SEALs drowned upon landing in the dark while carrying a full assortment of weapons, ammunition, and combat equipment. Kenneth J. Butcher, Kevin E. Lundberg, Stephen L. Morris, and Robert R. Schamberger were never seen again. The surviving SEAL jumpers were taken aboard the Navy frigate, where they were joined by other waiting SEALs and an Air Force combat control team. After an unsuccessful search for the missing men, this 20-man group attempted to complete their delayed mission. Their open boat swamped while evading a suspected patrol boat, causing the mission to be aborted. A second attempt was made the next night, but it was also unsuccessful. In the end, the airport reconnaissance was successfully performed 3 hours before H hour on D-Day by an Air Force AC-130. The 2 SEAL Team 6 regime change missions both involved Governor General Sir Paul Scoon, the Anglophile, Grenadian-born, appointed head of state. The principal mission was to fly to the Governor General's mansion in the capital city, secure him, his wife, and his staff, and then move them all out of the combat area. The second, simultaneous regime change mission was to capture and secure Grenada's long-distance radio transmitter station, located 7 miles north of the capital city. The station was to be held until Scoon could broadcast a message to his county and the Caribbean, declaring that the intervention was both legal and desired. In the event, that D-Day message was delayed by events for 3 days. The 2 SEAL regime change missions were coordinated with a third, a prison assault assigned to Delta Force and Army Rangers. A mixed service force of commandos departed behind schedule from Barbados in 9 Army transport helicopters at 500 on D-Day, October 25. By the time the UE-60 Black Hawks arrived over Grenadian soil, U.S. Marines had already landed on the east coast of the island and overt combat was underway. Marines waved as the late-arriving Black Hawks passed overhead Governor General's mansion. 2 Black Hawks carried 2 SEAL platoons to the 2-story, Georgian-style building overlooking Grenada's capital city, where Scoon lived and worked. 22 SEALs fast roped to the ground while under heavy enemy fire. The opposing fire damaged one of the helicopters and seriously wounded an Army flight commander. The stricken Black Hawk flew out to Navy ships offshore, also carrying away the SEALs' commanding officer and their portable satellite radio. Meanwhile, the assault team approached from the back of the mansion. The SEALs found Scoon and 10 other civilians hiding in the basement. The SEALs then continued to clear the rest of the house and began to set up a defensive perimeter to ensure security. Soon the mansion started to take fire from enemy soldiers armed with AK-47s and RPGs. As the incoming fire started to increase, Scoon and his party were moved to a safer location in the house. After the incoming fire had decreased, 3 men wearing Cuban-made uniforms approached the mansion, all of them carrying AK-47s. The SEALs shouted for the 3 men to stop where they were. When the 3 men heard the yells, They raised their weapons. The SEALs opened fire on the trio and killed them almost instantly. The SEALs suspected the men were Cubans, but the post-invasion evidence strongly indicates they were Grenadians. Soon afterward, 2 BTR-60s rolled up to the mansion's gates. One of the BTRs at the mansion's front gate opened fire. Just as the SEALs were about to fire a M72 Law anti-tank rocket, the BTR backed off and left with the other BTR. The vehicles were chased off by 2 protective AC-130s. The only communications the team had been through limited-range MX-360 radios. The team used these handheld radios to communicate with a SEAL command post on the island to call in airstrikes. As the radio's batteries started to fade, communications with the SEAL command post became weak. Once all the radios had died, when the SEALs urgently needed air support, they used a regular house phone to call JSOC, which was able to get an AC-130H Spectre gunship to hold station over the SEALs' position to provide air support. When morning came, Marines from Company G of Battalion Landing Team 2/8 arrived to relieve the SEALs. The Governor General and his wife were evacuated to the U.S. Guam, the invasion force flagship, by Marine helicopter. Radio station. While Schoon was being secured, 12 other operators from SEAL Team 6, under the command of Lieutenant Donald Kim Erskine, flew on to the radio station in a lone Black Hawk helicopter. The helicopter took small arms fire on the insertion. Once the team landed, it quickly overran the radio station compound and took enemy prisoners. The SEALs were told to hold the station until Governor Schoon and a broadcast team could be brought in. After the team took control of the compound, it was not able to make radio contact with the SEAL command post. The SEALs set up a defensive perimeter while they continued to try to make radio contact. As this was happening, a truck with armed Grenadian soldiers arrived at the station. The SEALs ordered the soldiers to drop the weapons. After a brief tense standoff, the soldiers opened fire, but they were quickly neutralized. All the soldiers were killed or wounded by the SEALs. The SEALs continued trying to make radio contact. Then a BTR-60 and 3 trucks, carrying a dozen soldiers each, were spotted coming towards the station. The soldiers flanked the building and the BTR covered the front entrance with its 14.5mm KPV heavy machine gun. The incoming fire on the SEALs' position was becoming devastatingly heavy, and they were running out of ammunition. The SEALs were engaged with a numerically superior enemy force. The team realized that their only option was to change their original plan of holding the radio station and instead disable the radio transmitter, then extract towards the water. They followed a pre-planned escape route out behind the station and across a broad meadow that led to a path that cut between cliffs and a beach. The meadow was exposed to Grenadian fire. The team leapfrogged across the exposed ground and took heavy fire, suffering several wounded. Finally reaching the end of the field, cut through a chain-link fence, ran into dense brush, and followed the path to the beach. The Grenadians were still in pursuit, so the SEALs waded into the water and began swimming parallel to the shore until they found cliff ledges in which to hide. Achille Lauro hijacking. On October 7, 1985, the Italian cruise ship Achille Lauro, carrying 400 passengers, including American citizens, was hijacked by Palestinian terrorists led by Mohammed Abul al-Abbas, also known as Mohammed Zaydan. The ship was hijacked in the Mediterranean Sea and forced to sail to southern Syria. President Ronald Reagan approved the deployment of Navy SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force operators to plan and prepare for a rescue attempt to free the vessel from its hijackers. On October 8, Syria refused permission for the ship to dock, and subsequently, the hijackers murdered Leon Klinghoffer, an elderly Jewish-American businessman. The ship then sailed towards Port Said, Egypt. On October 9, SEAL Team 6 assault members embarked on board the U.S. Iwo Jima LP-2, which steamed for Port Said. On October 10, the 4 terrorist hijackers boarded an Egypt Air Boeing 737 airliner, flew from Cairo, and headed for Tunisia. President Reagan approved military plans to intercept the aircraft over the Mediterranean Sea, Panama. During Operation Just Cause in Panama, Special Operations Forces consisted of 5 unconventional task forces: Green, Army Delta Force; Black, 3 Battalion, 7th Special Forces Group; Red, 75th Ranger Regiment; Blue, DEVGRU; and White, Navy Sea Airland, or SEAL Teams 4 and 2. DEVGRU's primary task, along with Delta Force, was locating and securing Panamanian ruler General Manuel Noriega. Specific details of DEVGRU's involvement remain classified. Somalia. During Operation Gothic Serpent in Somalia, DEVGRU was a part of Task Force Ranger. TF Ranger was made up of operators from Delta Force, the 75th Ranger Regiment, the 160th SOAR, the 24th Special Tactics Squadron, and SEALs from DEVGRU. Eric T. Olson, John Gay, Howard Wasdin, Homer Nearpass, and Richard Kaiser were the 5 SEALs who fought in the 1993 Battle of Mogadishu during the last mission of Operation Gothic Serpent to capture the warlord Mohammed Farah Aden. Olson would receive the Silver Star for his actions, which were cited as during combat actions in Mogadishu, Somalia, in October 1993. While under withering enemy fire during actions in support of UNOSOM operations, Captain Olson demonstrated a complete disregard for his safety in the accomplishment of his mission. Olson became commander of the Naval Special Warfare Development Group 1 year later. Operation Uphold Democracy. In 1991, DEVGRU was responsible for the successful recovery of Haitian President Jean-Bertrand Aristide and his family during a coup that deposed him. In another successful operation, codenamed Victor Squared, operators from Red Squadron DEVGRU were tasked with extracting other key Haitians, possibly U.S. intelligence assets / other members of Aristide's family, which also included an 18-month-old baby girl who was a U.S. citizen, and her family from a beach around the capital Port-au-Prince, assisted by members of the intelligence support activity who spirited these individuals to the extraction site, where they would be picked up and taken back to a U.S. Navy nuclear-guided missile cruiser stationed off the coast. NATO intervention in Bosnia, 1993-99. During NATO's intervention in the Bosnian War, the NSWBG operated alongside other members of NATO's implementation force, such as its Army counterpart, Delta Force, and the British SAS. These units were tasked with finding and apprehending persons indicted for war crimes, PIFOUC, and returning them to The Hague to stand trial. Some of DEVGRU's PIFOUC operations under team leader William Waddell included apprehending Goran Jeličić, Simo Zaric, Milan Simic, Miroslav Tadic, and Radislav Krstić. War in Afghanistan. Attempt to locate bin Laden in Tora Bora. In 2001, a CIA source reported seeing bin Laden in Tora Bora. A significant proportion of the ISR assets available in the theater converged on the area, and the initial plan based around a small helicopter assault force soon expanded to include U.S. Army Special Forces Green Beret ODAs and a Ranger element to provide a cordon for the SEALs. Eventually, the operation was launched under the cover of Air Force bombing, but after fruitless searching through the mountains, there was no sign of him. Operation Enduring Freedom. Afghanistan. In Afghanistan during Operation Enduring Freedom, OEF, U.S. Special Operations Forces played a central role in the fighting. It was also here they began to specialize in counter-terrorist tactics and information. Beginning of DEVGRU operations in Afghanistan. During the coalition invasion of Afghanistan, a squadron from DEVGRU was part of Task Force Sword, later renamed Task Force 11 in January 2002, which was established in early October 2001. It was a black SOF unit under the direct command of JSOC. This was a so-called hunter-killer force, whose primary objective was capturing or killing senior leadership and HVT within both Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. As part of Task Force Bawi, SEALs from DEVGRU were part of the AFOs, a 45-man reconnaissance unit made up of Delta Force recon specialists, augmented by selected SEALs from DEVGRU and supported by ISA's technical experts. The AFOs had been raised to support TF Sword and were tasked with intelligence preparation of the battlefield, working closely with the CIA and reporting directly to TF Sword. AFO conducted covert reconnaissance, sending small 2- or 3-man teams into Al-Qaeda backyard along the border with Pakistan. The AFO operators would deploy observation posts to watch and report enemy movements and numbers, as well as environmental reconnaissance. Much of the work was done on foot or ATVs. Operation Anaconda. Mako 31 destroys a DHK position. On February 28, 2002, On the eve of Operation Anaconda, 3 AFO teams were infiltrated into the Shahikot Valley. One of them, known as Mako 31, was composed of 3 SEALs from DEVGRU's Red Team, a USAF combat controller, and a U.S. Navy EOD operator. They infiltrated the area on foot via the southern edge of the valley to set up an observation post on a terrain feature known as the Finger. All 3 teams were tasked with confirming enemy strengths and dispositions, including anti-aircraft emplacements, ensuring the designated Rakuten HLZs were clear of obstructions, and providing terminal guidance for air support both before and during the insertion of conventional forces. Near H hour on March 1, 2002, Mako 31 found a group of foreign fighters had an established position and were manning a DSK HMG on the peak where they planned to set up an observation post. If the DSK had not been disabled before then, it could have shot down Chinooks carrying conventional forces. The SEALs therefore planned to ambush the terrorists in the pre-dawn darkness before the Rakutens flew into the valley. However, they were spotted by an Uzbek insurgent and a brief firefight ensued, killing 5 out of 7 foreign fighters as another insurgent fired a PKM. The team broke contact and brought in an AC-130, which destroyed the enemy encampment with 105mm rounds. Battle of Takur Jar. During the crucial Battle of Takur Jar, part of Operation Anaconda, a small team of DEVGRU assigned to an AFO task force was tasked with establishing observation positions, OPs, on the high ground above the proposed landing zones of U.S. conventional forces. It was one of the most violent battles of Operation Anaconda. In the early hours of March 4, 2002, an MH-47E Chinook helicopter, piloted by the U.S. Army's 160th SOAR Night Stalkers, was carrying Mako 21 and Mako 30 teams, mostly made up of SEALs from DEVGRU. The original plan was that Mako 21 would link up with AFO Team Julia at the northern end of the valley, resupply it, and then establish a hide site/observation post on the eastern ridge above Task Force Rakuten's blocking position. Whilst Mako 30 planned to establish an observation point on the peak of Takur Jar, which commanded a view of the Shahikot Valley. Mako 30 would be inserted at a point 4,300 feet, 1,300 meters, east of the peak. But circumstances led the SEALs to choose the summit of Takur Jar itself as the insertion point. As the helicopter was nearing its landing zone, both the pilots and the men in the back observed fresh tracks in the snow, goatskins, and other signs of recent human activity. As the pilots and team discussed a mission abort, an RPG struck the side of the aircraft, wounding 1 crewman as machine gun bullets ripped through the fuselage, cutting hydraulic and oil lines. Fluid spewed about the ramp area of the helicopter, intercepting and destroying an enemy convoy. On 17 March 2002, in the final days of Operation Anaconda, operators from DEVGRU, commanded by the SEAL who led the Mako 30 mission on Takur Jar, with an attached British SBS operator, intercepted a convoy of Al-Qaeda fighters traveling in 3 SUVs via 3 MH-47E Chinooks, with a mixed force of U.S. Army Rangers traveling in MH-60K Blackhawk helicopters as backup. After an ensuing firefight, 16 Al-Qaeda fighters were killed and 2 seriously wounded were captured. The American force suffered no casualties. The DEVGRU SEALs and Rangers searched and treated the wounded prisoners. They also prepared the enemy vehicles, weapons, and munitions for destruction. Then the DEVGRU SEALs, Rangers, and British SBS operatives were extracted from the area by their Chinooks. Protecting Hamid Karzai. On September 5, 2002, DEVGRU operators protected President Hamid Karzai during an assassination attempt in Kandahar. The DEVGRU operatives shot the would-be assassins, accidentally shooting 2 Afghan soldiers who were wrestling with the assassin. During the attack, a round ricocheted and hit a SEAL operative in the head, lightly wounding him, requiring him to improvise a bandage with his t-shirt, escorting a detainee. In 2003, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was arrested in a joint CIA and ISI operation in Pakistan and had to be flown out to a U.S. black site prison. Companies from the U.S. Army Rangers and 82nd Airborne Division secured an improvised desert strip in a dry riverbed near the Pakistani border, and an MC-130H Combat Talon I plane landed and lowered its ramp. SEALs from DEVGRU appeared in desert patrol vehicles carrying the detainee arrived and drove up the ramp into the back of the plane, which then taxied and lifted off. Raid in Jalalabad. It was April 2005, and a group of DEVGRU SEALs was sent into Afghanistan to hunt high-value al-Qaeda targets. After the SEALs flew to Afghanistan, arriving at Jalalabad airport, the SEALs got into Toyota Hilux pickup trucks and drove into the city. They arrived at their safe house. Their SEAL team leader waiting at the safe house greeted them and debriefed them on their mission of hunting high-value al-Qaeda targets. After the SEALs adjusted to their new lifestyle, they went through leisurely activities, interacted with the locals, and gathered intelligence. Since there wasn't a huge American presence at the time, the Americans didn't feel like occupiers. The American SEALs did not dress in uniform and were thus able to blend in and look less intimidating. The relationship between the locals and the SEALs was very good. At times at the safe house, there were lines of dozens of Afghan civilians who wanted to work for the Americans. The SEALs would also give chocolate to children who asked for it. The Afghan children loved the American SEALs, and the SEALs loved them back. The parents of the children saw that and grew protective of the Americans. To further blend in, the SEALs hired people to drive the SEALs in three-wheeled vehicles called tuk-tuks. At times, the SEALs dressed up in local garb in Jalalabad. Then the SEALs received intelligence that there was a house where a terrorist lived. Since the SEAL team leader didn't have a large raiding force to capture the target, more SEALs were called in from DEVGRU down to Jalalabad. Attempted rescue of a British security contractor. In September 2005, a British security contractor was kidnapped by Taliban insurgents in Farah province. JSOC managed to locate the hostage and insurgents in a mountainous region of Balabolak. A DEVGRU team arrived in an early morning raid, but the Taliban murdered the hostage. Attack on an enemy compound. In July 2006, a pair of MH-47As from 160th SOAR attempted to insert a combined strike element of DEVGRU Rangers and Afghan commandos in Helmand province so it could attack a target compound. With some troops on the ground, a large insurgent force ambushed them. Both helicopters were struck by small arms fire. One MH-47E pilot put his aircraft directly in the line of fire, protecting the other MH-47E whose assault team it was carrying was still disembarking. Inevitably, the MH-47E was hit by an RPG which caused it to crash land. The skill of the Night Stalker pilots saved the operators and the aircrew, and no one was seriously wounded in the crash. The Ranger commander and a 2nd Commando Regiment operator who was attached to DEVGRU at the time organized an all-round defense, while the other MH-47E held back the advancing insurgents until its miniguns ran out of ammunition. An AC-130 Spectre joined the battle and kept the downed crew and passengers safe until a British immediate response team helicopter successfully recovered them. The AC-130 then destroyed the MH-47E wreck, denying it to the Taliban. Raid on a house in Afghanistan. On October 31, 2006, DEVGRU SEALs conducted a raid on a house in Afghanistan. The SEALs were short-handed, so they only had 4 members available for the raid. One SEAL would provide overwatch, while the other 3 SEALs would assault the house. After entering the house, the point man got into a fistfight with an insurgent. The 2nd SEAL entering saw with his night vision 2 enemy combatants waking up and start reaching for their AK-47 rifles. The 2nd SEAL opened fire, killing both insurgents. The 1st SEAL, who was in a fistfight with the surviving insurgent, finally overpowered him by restraining him in a headlock. The SEALs put a hood on the captured insurgent's head and left the building so they could extract them. As the SEALs were moving to the extraction point with their captured prisoner, a big dog charged at them barking. The SEAL, who was in overwatch, fired 2 shots, killing the attack dog, thus saving the lives of his fellow DEVGRU operatives. Rescue of 61-year-old engineer. In August 2008, an American Army Corps of Engineers worker was taken hostage by members of Gulbuddin Hekmatyar's militant group known as Hezb-i Islami. The hostage was taken to and held in the mountains of Wardak province, some 30 miles west of Kabul. 2 of the Hezb-i Islami militants were guarding the American hostage. The captors were confident that they were safe out of the U.S. military's reach by the treacherous terrain that would supposedly discourage or deter a rescue attempt. So the guards let down their guard, not expecting any rescue operation to be mounted. However, DEVGRU overcame difficulties dealing with the environment after operating in the Afghan region for a long time in other operations following 9/11 events. So the SEALs of DEVGRU were capable of mounting a rescue operation. The hostage's location was finally pinpointed in October 2008. Approximately 24 DEVGRU operators from Blue Squadron were set down a few miles from the location where the hostage was held in a hut. The SEALs successfully trekked through treacherous mountainous terrain, quietly approaching the hut that held the hostage following a hike for more than 4 hours. The 2 militant guards were at the hut. One was posted in the hut while the other was posted outside. A 7-man assault force stealthily crept forward and infiltrated the hut structure. With sound-suppressed weapons, the DEVGRU operators killed both guards. After setting the American hostage free, the SEALs safely exfiltrated the hostage back to their headquarters by helicopter. Then the liberated hostage was taken to the U.S. Embassy in Kabul. Raid in Central Afghan Mountains, south of Kabul, 2009. DEVGRU conducted a raid in the Central Afghan Mountains, south of Kabul on some compounds. The DEVGRU SEALs landed at their target objective by helicopter. An American drone in the air tracked the movement of 8 Taliban fighters who ran out of the compound when the SEALs arrived. The SEALs immediately pursued the fleeing enemy after their helicopter transport landed. The Taliban fighters who fled the compounds were headed for a ridgeline 300 meters north of the compound. The first group of SEALs were trying to cut off the enemy fighters who fled the compound, while another group of SEALs proceeded to clear the compound. The first group of SEALs pursued the fleeing enemy fighters. When the enemy was spotted, the DEVGRU SEALs opened fire, killing 3 fighters. The rest of the fighters left their dead and continued to race down the backside of the ridge. The American drone pilot notified the SEALs on the radio that 5 Taliban fighters were headed north towards several other compounds. A laser from the drone moved down the backside of the hill, showing the SEALs which direction to follow the 5 fighters. The SEALs advanced cautiously toward the ridge position and found the 3 dead Taliban fighters lying on the ground. One had a machine gun next to his body, while another had an RPG on the ground. Bo Bergdahl. In June 2009, U.S. Army infantryman Bo Bergdahl deserted his post with the 1st Battalion, 501st Infantry Regiment, and was subsequently captured by the Taliban. Over his 5 years of captivity, DEVGRU Red Squadron operators and rangers from the 75th Ranger Regiment spun up operations to rescue him, but each resulted in a dry hole. One such operation carried out south of Kabul in July 2009 resulted in SEAL Senior Chief Petty Officer James Hatch being seriously wounded and a combat assault dog, Remco, killed. Raid in Kunar, August 2009. After the mission, in an unsuccessful attempt at rescuing Bo Bergdahl, which had a DEVGRU operative wounded and a combat assault dog killed, DEVGRU was prepared for another operation. This operation was to conduct a raid on a couple of compounds in Kunar to eliminate Taliban fighters, and then withdraw back to base after completing their objective. So 2 teams of SEALs were formed to infiltrate through terrain that was thought impassable, since there was the possibility of enemy lookouts watching out for American forces moving out on the trail away from their base. The Army of the U.S. Armed Forces would patrol together with the 2 teams of Navy SEALs when leaving their base. After the combined Army and SEAL patrol traveled some distance, the Navy SEALs would break off from the patrol and sneak off unseen, while the larger Army formation would keep on traveling as bait/distraction for the possible enemy lookouts to spy on. The 2 teams of SEALs traveled through their infiltration route and finally made it to the target compounds. With the element of surprise, the SEALs with mostly sound-suppressed carbines, a few light machine guns, and some sniper rifles struck with perfect precision and killed all 17 Taliban fighters that were occupying the compounds with not a single casualty inflicted on the SEALs. The SEALs then successfully conducted SSD at the target compounds. Taliban reinforcements were arriving some distance away, increasing numbers, so the SEALs destroyed all the enemy weapons and ammunition they found with timed explosives. Then the SEALs withdrew safely back to base a long distance, while an AC-130 gunship provided air cover, bombarding the incoming Taliban reinforcements, which may have killed an estimated 7 or 8 more Taliban fighters. After arriving back at base, the SEALs handed over all the intelligence gathered from their SSE to the Army captain. Raid in a valley in Afghanistan. The DEVGRU SEALs were on a winter deployment in 2009. U.S. intelligence analysts were tracking a group of fighters in a valley south of Kabul. The U.S. analysts were tracking down a very high-level Taliban commander and his group. Using multiple sources, including drones, they were able to locate the enemy commander and his fighters. Even though the Americans knew these were Taliban insurgents, they carried no weapons, meaning that the Americans could not bomb them with airstrikes by the rules of engagement. So U.S. High Command had to send in the DEVGRU operatives to get close to the Taliban element and eliminate them after confirming that they were enemy insurgents. The SEALs knew that this element of insurgents would conduct more attacks or set IEDs that would kill or critically injure more American/coalition forces. The planning was left to the SEALs. The DEVGRU SEALs decided that they would fly in and land well down the valley, far enough away from the village that the Taliban wouldn't hear the noise from the SEAL helicopters in the darkness. The SEALs were inserted in an isolated area, accompanied by U.S. Army Rangers, Afghan commandos, and U.S. Army Battle Space Owners, BSO. The DEVGRU SEALs patrolled their target area for several hours. The American drone pilots reported that the Taliban element had come to a building and were bedding down for the night. Successful night raid. It was a late winter afternoon in Afghanistan. The DEVGRU SEALs were about to be given another mission. A Predator drone had been observing a group of Taliban fighters numbering 5 to 7 fighters traveling from compound to compound, looking for a warm bed and meal. The U.S. personnel observing from the drone feed saw that the insurgents walked through town and decided to hide out at this random house for the night. The insurgents knocked on the door, and when the people inside answered, the insurgents pushed through the door. They even moved their vehicles inside the compound's wall. The DEVGRU SEALs would be sent in to eliminate this Taliban group. The SEALs planned to land about 5 kilometers from the target and patrol to the compound. This would allow the SEALs to keep the element of surprise. The DEVGRU SEALs loaded up into their Chinooks and flew to their destination. After the SEALs had landed, the Chinooks took off. The SEALs got into patrol formation and started toward the compound where the enemy fighters would be asleep. When the SEALs had reached the compound, they prepared to assault it. The DEVGRU SEALs infiltrated the compound successfully and stealthily, making their way inside, capturing a Taliban leader. It was summer 2010. The DEVGRU SEALs were adjusting to better improve their methods of performing their missions in Afghanistan. Later on, the SEALs got another target to snatch and grab. The target was a Taliban commander or facilitator. The SEALs tracked the target to a bed-down location in a village near the Pakistani border. After the SEALs raided the compound and captured him, the SEALs exfiltrated out of the area with their prisoner. Successful elimination of 2 Taliban commanders. Further in the summer of 2010, the DEVGRU SEALs were going on another mission to eliminate 2 Taliban commanders. The SEALs traveled to the target location by helicopters and inserted a good distance away where the enemy would not hear the rotors of the helicopters. The DEVGRU operatives and Afghan commandos would then patrol the target area. After they had arrived near some compounds, the SEALs advanced quietly. An American drone controlled by an American pilot flying overhead kept surveillance over the area and radioed to the SEALs that 2 movers were leaving the target compound and heading east. The 2 movers were the Taliban commanders. They were both armed with AK-47 assault rifles. They ran into 2 American personnel. The 2 Americans were a DEVGRU SEAL and an American PJ. The 2 Taliban commanders with their AK-47 rifles skid to a stop and attempted to fire. Before they had a chance to level their AK-47s, the SEAL and American PG quickly fired multiple rounds into each Taliban commander, killing them both. 2 EKIA radioed the SEAL. The DEVGRU SEALs had successfully killed the 2 Taliban commanders. Rescue of Dr. Dilip Joseph, 8 December 2012. On 8 December 2012, DEVGRU operators from Gold Squadron rescued Dilip Joseph, an American doctor held captive by the Taliban in eastern Afghanistan. Dr. Joseph, who was working for an aid organization, was kidnapped along with 2 Afghan colleagues at a roadblock by armed men and were moved to a compound in Lagma province. The 2 Afghans were later released after negotiations. When intelligence indicated Dr. Joseph was in imminent danger, a rescue operation was mounted. A DEVGRU member involved in the rescue, Navy Petty Officer First Class Nicholas Check, was also killed. Czech was a highly decorated combat veteran awarded the Bronze Star Medal with Valor and the Purple Heart, as well as the Navy Cross posthumously awarded following the mission, among many others. Senior Chief Naval Special Warfare Operator Edward C. Byers received the Medal of Honor on February 29, 2016, for his actions during the rescue. As Dr. Dilip Joseph was being held hostage by the Taliban, DEVGRU was prepared to stage a raid to rescue the doctor. After the American intelligence personnel gathered and analyzed the information, Operation Freedom Sentinel. By the end of 2014, U.S. and NATO forces withdrew from Afghanistan, concluding Operation Enduring Freedom. Afghanistan. The following year, U.S. operations within Afghanistan continued under the codename Operation Freedom Sentinel. The attempted rescue of American and Australian hostages in Afghanistan, August 2016. On August 7, 2016, an American and an Australian professor working at the American University of Afghanistan in Kabul were kidnapped. CNN reported that a few days later, operators from SEAL Team 6 attempted to rescue them. The operators parachuted halo jump into Afghanistan, but failed to find them at the location they searched. However, the BBC reported that no U.S. service personnel or civilians were harmed, and several hostile forces were killed. The U.S. was never certain the professors were at the site, or if they were when they had been moved. Some electronic media was recovered indicating the identities of those who were holding them. Personnel recovery from aircraft crash site. DEVGRU was also involved in the recovery of U.S. personnel killed when a U.S. Bombardier E-11, a jet, crashed in mountainous territory in eastern Afghanistan on January 27, 2020.